it's Nikolaou. I'm really so today we have Mr. Lysandros Nikolaou, and he's a Python code developer. So thank you for joining today, and it's an honor to speaking with a Python code developer and talking about the great and so in about the recent Python 3.0 update. Many people just got very excited about the exciting features which has been brought to the 3.9, like improving the parser thing and putting up a vector call. So let's what do you think about the Python 3.9 update? I just want to hear from you.
Okay. 3.9 is actually a version I'm deeply, I would say, in love with because, I've been working on the parser for like a year now, and it's the one of the biggest features in 3.9. So it's deeply meaningful to me that 3.9 gets adopted, um, and generally that it gets used by people, and that people are okay with it and do not discover a handful of bugs. But I think that there are many new features that really improve the language. There were some benchmarks that showed that we're okay in terms of speed, and there were things like remove prefix and remove suffix. I think that was PEP 616, right?
Yeah,
And there
yeah.
was PEP 617, the PEG parser project, and I think it's a really good time for the language because it's really going forward, and I think 3.10 is going to be the game changer. 3.10 is an awesome. I think it will be an awesome release, and we're working really hard on performance and improving the parser furthermore, and some new changes like pattern matching or something like that. So yeah, 3.10 is going to be the version to look for.
So I've heard this thing like 3.10 will improve the all the performance of the Python by 10x, like the overall thing, the performance and the speed. What so it can improve by 10x. So I just heard this in the community also. Is it like true that we can see a massive update in the speed of like the grammar thing and the parser thing? So what do we can expect in the
It,
three?
Yeah, it's not really a change in the parser itself.
Okay.
It's a change in on the bigger virtual machine implementation. There are actually currently two projects that are working on performance. It's the first one is Mark Shannon's project on improving the virtual machine and in order to gain performance, and that's actually there was actually recently a proposal just last week that we could speed up Python 5x in the next 5 releases. I think no.
That's
Uh, is that it? I'm not sure if that's exactly the proposal, but there was a great proposal by Mark Shannon there, and there's another project by some core developers. There are some that have been working on it for the past two releases or so. It's Yuri Selivanov and Pablo Galindo, and they've been working on the interpreter stuff and on actually caching bytecodes, and that showed some significant speed up. It shows something like 14% speed up in just caching one opcode. So they've done the caching for load adder. There are a bunch of byte codes, and
okay.
they've only cached two of them. And this already shows a huge speed up. Like in the benchmarks that use this feature a lot, it's something like 10 to 14%. So it's really a huge speed up. So yeah, 310. We think that 310 is going to be much better performance wise as well.
Okay, that's great. The community is actually looking forward for the 3.10. And actually, I had this very small thing. Like, I went to the Q&A session of the Python code developer, and I just got to know that many people are actually interested in the grammar thing of the Python. So, what is it with the grammar thing? Why so many code developers? What makes it so attractive that all code developers are just going to putting it? And we can see actually the massive speed improvement in that. So, what attracts you to the parser thing and the grammar thing of the Python?
So for me, it was like that. I really really wanted to work on some Python internals, and at the time, this was like a year ago now. There was this awesome project by Guido that was working on the parser, and I just talked to him, and that's what got me started in working on the parser project. And I've always had a love about compilers and parsers and language design and language implementation discussions. So this was really a topic I was really interested in, and that's what got me into working on the parser project. But basically, improving the parser is a really huge step because it involves many things, and I think that the fact that this whole world of new features and capabilities opens up is really what gets everyone going, and we see pattern matching or there there was recently a proposal about macros in Python, and all of this is possible because of the parser. So it's really that the new parser has given us the possibility to expand our horizons in one way and really make things possible that weren't before.
That's really great. That's really great. Actually, we can see the result for itself. Like the benchmark, it's speaking for itself that Python 3.9 has massively improved in terms of speed. The vector, I saw the benchmarks. It was the vector call thing that recent garbage collection regarding that all, which was introduced for the linked list, queues, and stacks. And further, there was a big PHP parser, if I'm right, which replaced the L11 parser. So I just wanted to know that I went through many of the Guerrero articles, and he mentioned that how he started with the L11 parser and how he created from the scratch, but suddenly, he changed it to peg parser. So how can you say that? Like how peg parser is better than LL1 parser? And I just want to know how does it what ambiguity it does solve and what kind of futures we are looking at the peg parser.
Oh, the features the new peg parser enables are many, and I think I don't think there's something inherently wrong with LL1 parsers. It's not that they're worse; it's just that they're less powerful, and the world in the last 30 years that Python exists has really changed. So Guido started up writing the old parser in like 1989 or 1990. And at that time, memory was really something not that cheap, and we didn't really have much of it. Um, but in these 30 years since then, memory has become really cheap, and we do have loads of memory in our computers, and we can take advantage of that, right? And so a peg parser uses a parsing technique that implements an infinite look-ahead buffer. That means that when you have a grammar rule and you got to decide if you're going to go one way or another way, you have the whole stream of tokens to decide upon. So in an LL1 parser, you can only look ahead one token. In a peg parser, you can really look ahead to the whole token stream.
Right.
And that's something that takes advantage of the amount of memory we have at our hands. So uh, just because of the of this having all the tokens in memory, that means that the peg parser is going to be a bit less space efficient. Is going to consume some more space, some more memory, but you trade that off for speed or for being more powerful and for making new features possible, and you gain lots of things, and so. Um, yeah, the bottom line is that it's not that LL1 is inherently worse. It's just that the LL1 parser, the old parser, was built in another time where resources were different and space was more important. I can go over some of the things that the peg parser enables if you want. There were some problems with the old parser, with the LL1 parser, and that's basically three problems. So the biggest problems we had were three. First of all, there were some constructs in the Python language that were not possible to parse with the old parser. That's things like parenthesized context managers, so parenthesized with statements. So you couldn't have something like with open parentheses and then context managers and then close parentheses. It was just impossible to do that with the old parser. And with a new peg parser, it's something really, really easy. And we, from the first time we implemented context managers, this was inside. There's another problem in that the Python grammar with the old parser did not really represent the actual Python syntax. So we had something things like assignments or named expressions, things like the walrus operator as well, the grammar itself did not differentiate between expressions and assignment targets. So you could have things like assignment to a function call, which is not really valid Python syntax. And there was a huge amount of code after the parsing was done that was checking for such cases. And after the parsing was done, was denying those cases and was throwing syntax errors later on in the compiler pipeline. And with the new parser, that's fixed as well. We got rid of all those checks after the parsing, and all these checks are now in the parser. So it's not that you have to change like 3 or 4 files when you implement a new feature. You just have to change the grammar and you're done with parsing. You have to change the compiler or the tokenizer as well. But as far as parsing goes, you only have to change the grammar. Before that, it was changing these checks, these post checks, post-processing checks, and you had to do some more things, which was making maintenance a bit more difficult. And the third problem with the old parser, and that's not really a problem, but it's something that we think we made better with the peg parser, is that we used to have an intermediate parse tree. So before the peg parser, we were going from Python source, from actual Python code, to a CST or a concrete syntax tree, and then to an AST, an abstract syntax tree. And now there is no need for that CST. And what the parser actually does is it goes from the tokens, from the actual Python source code, to the AST without the need for a CST. So whatever space we lost in implementing a peg parser, we gained back by getting rid of the concrete syntax tree. So that's something I think we did well too.
Yeah, actually, I can see there is a lot of ambiguity which was with the previous 11 parser, and the peg parser actually solved it many. And I could actually see through the articles, and even you were the important. You have an important contribution to the peg parser recently, and for which I just went through some articles, and you got you were involved in the new parser project. If I'm right.
Right. I
yeah.
was this was my main project for the last year.
Okay, so was this the project which led you to into the code developer team of the Python? Or
Right, yeah. I started contributing to the parser project, to the new parser project, early October 2019, so a bit over a year ago. And then this was what it took lots. I spent lots and lots of hours in developing the new parser together with Guido and Pablo, and that's what got me into the Python community and got me active in the core development team. And in late June, I was promoted to core dev.
that's actually, I have read few articles like people actually have to spend years and years to actually get promoted to the co-development team. But I went through your journey. I saw that you got promoted at a, like, I can just see how many contribution you did, and that was actually very great. And you got promoted in a very short. You can say that you started in the October and you got promoted to June, and that was a very, like, the community just loved it, and that's an actually great. So we are actually looking forward for all the new parser. So is there any other project you're currently looking at? So apart from the parser thing, or which attracts you?
There's some parser things we look forward to in 3.10. We've got some improvements there. Um, One project I'm currently working on, and I don't know. I think you know. Last week we had the core development sprint, and we spoke about lots of things there. And one project I'm really interested in, and I'm really excited about, is an internal change we want to do to F strings. Um, how F strings are working is a bit nuanced and cumbersome for the maintenance of the C Python code base, because F strings are parsed as strings, as just regular strings, and then there's a handwritten parser that parses out the string literals and the string expressions in the F string. So a project I've been working with for some time now with Eric Smith, the man that wrote F strings, and with Guido and Pablo and Emily and Badhan, is moving parsing of the F strings to the new peg parser. And
Okay,
I think that's a really exciting project because it's going to make maintenance of the parser much more easy. And Yeah, that's one project I'm very excited about. Another project is this performance project I talked about earlier, about caching the opcodes. And that's something I discussed briefly about with Pablo. Pablo is a core dev I worked with on the Peg Parser project, and he's the release manager for 3.10 and 3.11. And briefly talked about caching opcodes. And he showed me around the project, and I'm really interested in that as well. And I really look forward to learning more about that project. And that's probably something I'll be spending some time on in the next months in order to make Python a tad faster in 3.10.
that's really great, and we are actually looking forward for the Python release of 3.10 and 3.9. I'm pretty much sure that will be great performance and speed improvement, and the community will just love it. Even I'm just have seen the result for itself, and the speed and the performance were actually great. So I think so Python has really got a bright future ahead, and there's like, we thought that this thing, it's about all about the flexibility, but now the Python, I think, has become about the speed and performance, and now p so I just want to say, how does it feel to work, like what's the work experience with like the Guado and the because the Guado is the original creator of the Python. So how do you, how you can say that you have worked with him, right? So how does he mentor, and what kind of stuff we got to learn from him, and what kind of things he's currently looking for with for the Python.
It's been an incredible journey so far. So, like I said, I started early October last year, and it's been really and it's been really awesome working with Pablo and Guido. They both helped me a lot in learning so much about parsers, about Python, about programming in general. So it's truly been awesome. But I think that working with all of the core developers is just like an incredible experience, because every single one of them is really an excellent person, and and you always have things to learn, and new things to nerd about, and there's really it's I don't think I can say much more than it that it has been an awesome experience so far. Pablo and Guido have mentored me a lot in the past year, obviously, before being promoted to a core dev, and after, I've learned things like backwards compatibility, and how you think about developing Python, and how you think about users, and how you think about not breaking people's codes, and all that stuff that was really unknown to me prior to working on Python. So it's really learning process, and being mentored by Pablo and Guido has really been great.
That's really great. Even I wish to be someday become the start contributing to Python, and maybe not just very much for the code developer thing, but I just want to contribute to Python and so on, looking for projects. So yeah, and I just want to ask you that is there any route, like, have you ever thought about when you started contributing to the Python? Did you ever thought that you wanted to be in the code development team, or you just was like, I just want to contribute because I want to make the Python thing? So, what was your motive behind this? I just like the code.
The main motive was that back when I sent Guido my first email in order to get to work with him on the Pagan project, it was more of a thesis thing, because I was just starting with my bachelor's thesis, and so I was looking for a project to work on for my thesis, and that's why. And I was always really loving working with Python, and and working in Python internals as well. I had an interest in Python internals also prior to working on the Python project. Um, and really, the motive behind it was just working on my thesis, and working on something that I was really interested in. I didn't think I would become a core developer in October when I started, or something like that. I just wanted to work on a project with Guido and Pablo, and I really spent like lots and lots and lots of hours working on that project, and then when 3.9 came to the alpha phase and the beta phase, we really, together with Pablo and Guido, we were working full time on the project, because there were many bugs we needed to solve by the alpha phase. And so after that, becoming a core dev was like something that was proposed to me by Guido and Pablo in June, and of course I took it up, because I'd already known some things about the Python community, but getting to know it better, I felt that it was the greatest next step for me, and yeah, it's been amazing, truly.
Thank you for that. And one more thing, like, as a code developer, what are your responsibilities, and what kind of responsibilities and things which are introduced to you, and like after stepping into the team, what all instructions are being given to you, like things to. So what are the? I just want to know about these things.
Yeah, there's not really a specific set of instructions you get sent when you're promoted to a core dev, because in order to be promoted to a core dev, that means that you've worked on the Python project, and you probably know all of the stuff you need to know prior to being a core dev. The main new responsibilities you get when you're promoted is that you get to click the merge button on GitHub, so you get to live with the consequences of accepting a change into the Python code base, whatever that means. It could mean that you need to revert it afterwards, or that you need to fix something you broke, but it's really not in terms of practicalities, so to say. It's not a huge change. It's just that you've got to be a little more careful when you're pushing a change, because whatever happens after that change, you have to go back and fix it. So that's one thing, and another thing is that you get to be a part of all these awesome events for core developers, like the Language Summit, which I attended back in April, even before becoming a core dev, and the core sprints we had last week as well. And it's really awesome, and I think that's the best thing about being a core dev, that you get to meet all these great people and work with them and discuss about Python with them, and I think that's really the best.
That's really. So does it give you some nightmare sometimes when you press that merge button? Like, what could go wrong? Is there anything?
Most of the time, well, we got a pretty good test suite, and yeah, most of the new changes are pretty good, pretty well tested. So when you click it, you're kind of confident that it's going to be okay. But even if it's not, it's not the end of the world. It's just you can always go back and fix that, or you can always go back and revert it, and it's totally okay. So yeah, you're kind of worried the first time or the second time, but yeah, after a while, it just it's
Okay.
yeah.
So, are you working as a full time as an open source contributor, or do you work have a side job with? So, I just want to know that. Like many people, yeah,
Yeah,
about.
no. Since July, I've been working full time on a startup on a tech startup called Seafair, and so there we develop a platform in Python for connecting shipping companies with people that work in sea. So I do have a full time job that's not directly connected to open source. And yeah, it's been difficult to balance open source contributions and full-time job that's not in open source. But it's what most of the core devs do and have to do. So yeah, it's not really something to very much be bothered about.
So, is there any specific amount of hours you have to dedicate for the contributing to the Python projects? So, like in a week, if you are not able to, suppose like I have been working for the whole, you have been working for the whole 8 for a week and you're not able to contribute. So, is there any such things or restrictions in the contribution?
I'm not sure I got the question. Is it if there's some time requirements you have to fulfill for
Yeah,
working
yeah,
in Python? No,
yeah.
no, no, really not. Because I was promoted in late June, and then early July I started my job, and it was my first job, my first full-time job. So it took a bit getting used to. So for about 1.5, 2 months, I wasn't very active in contributing to Python, and I just got active a week or 2 weeks ago with the core dev sprints. Um, but yeah, there's no requirement, and there's folks that have been inactive for like years, and they're still core developers and can come back whenever they want to. So yeah, no requirement.
Okay, okay, okay. And one more thing. So let's get back to more how you got into programming and how it now it's since you're programming in Python. So from programming to how you got into Python programming. So I just want to know that.
I got into programming back in high school when I took some lessons on programming, and I was initially using C. So without knowing anything about programming, I started with C, and I loved C. It was a really great language, but it gave me a bit of a hard time. So after facing some difficulties with C, then I searched for another language, and I found out about this awesome language, Python, and so that's how I started working with Python. So I went first to programming in C, and then I gave that up for a bit and started working in Python, and then basically all of my personal projects were in Python because instantly I fell in love with the language, and yeah, I started working in Python back in high school, and I haven't looked back. And sometime I think in my freshman year, I think so, I started developing an interest in finding out more about Python internals. And I went and started looking into the internals of the Python language and how everything works and how everything is tied up together. And that's when I started contributing to Python. I think it was back in 2018 or something when I contributed my first patch. It was like a typo fix. Um, and then I contributed some more patches like documentation patches and fixing typos and stuff like that. And then I started working on some GitHub workflow bots we've got on the Python team. I wrote some Python code there. And that's how I started contributing and getting to know the community and the Python language and the people behind the Python project. And yeah, that's how I got into Python.
Yeah, that's actually a great journey. So is there any certain kind of resources or maybe you referred to for get started into Python? Maybe some links or maybe any book you referred during your high school years for getting in basics and all. And what
Getting into Python basics or Python internals?
let's start with the basics, like what kind of books you have referred and all kind of resources for it.
I think that I've only read one book for Python, and that was I'm not sure what the name was, but I think it was Automating the Boring Stuff with Python. Yeah, it was a great book.
Yeah, it's a great book actually.
And that's the only one, and I think it gives you a pretty good sense of what the language is about and how powerful and awesome it is. And then it's mostly looking through documentation. I think we're doing a really good job of documenting everything and trying to improve our documentation. And so just going through the docs and looking through them when working on new stuff, that's how I really learned more about the language.
Oh, okay. And moving on to the internals of the Python. So as you mentioned for the parser projects, so what kind of resources and we are you actually referred for the same?
There are some resources on Python internals. There's the dev guide, which probably talks more about contributing and how to start contributing and stuff like that. But there are some sections on the dev guide about Python internals. And there are some great documentation sites by Victor Steiner, one other core dev, that talk about the C API or things like that. And I think there's a new book also that's called C Python Internals, um, and that's really a great book on if anyone wants to get into getting more about how Python works on the inner side and how everything is tied up. It gets into pretty great detail. So yeah, I've not read all of it, but it must be a hard read.
Yeah, I get it. I just face the same problem. Many people ask me what is the best resources. I feel like documentation is actually the best resources you can actually find out there. But not many as a starter, I would not be attracted to the documentation because it does not look very colorful, or maybe there might be not pictures inside that. So yeah, even I face a bit of trouble with the documentation, but mostly I started looking for. I started mostly I'm into the web development, so I just look for the Mozilla thing. So yeah, is there
Right.
an, is there any other languages you have been coding or interested? You see a great future in that language. Maybe that could be the future in the coming years.
Oh, there's a bunch of languages that are actually being developed right now and really improved. I think, yeah, Python, of course, is one of them, but there are some other great ones like Go or Rust. Rust, I think, has a great future ahead. And I recently heard that there's going to be a Rust software foundation, like the Python software foundation, and it's going to get out of the Mozilla Foundation. So yeah, that's a pretty big step for it. So yeah, let's see what comes. I'm pretty excited about that as well.
Even I'm pretty much excited. Even in the Python Q&A session, many people were actually discussing about, like few people discuss about the Rust and its in future, and it's actually a great language for. Even I got to know about its border checkers thing, and it's how it output error. So, even the recently I saw a little bit of hype in the Rust thing. I don't know why many companies like Facebook or maybe Microsoft started hiring Rust developers, and I don't know why they
Mm,
started. And even there was a discussion by the Linux development team that they could be embedding the Rust into the kernel. So yeah, maybe yeah.
wow.
I see.
Okay.
Yeah. Even I see a great future of Rust. So maybe we can look when we talk couple of after few years, maybe we can talk about the Rust thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, and there was one more question which was for you in the Q&A, and you were not present. So yeah, we can you can answer it here. So what is the hardest, most interesting, most fun, and the most boring part of the Python code development?
Oh, yeah, I remember that question. It's actually a very good question because, and I gave some thought on it when I prepared for it during the dev sprints. And I think the most fun is really easy. Is just working all this with all these great people in the core development team. It's really amazing that the people you get to meet and talk with. It's really the most fun part about being a Python core developer. Um, the hardest part is balancing your contribution time with your job and having everything be balanced. Most of actually all of the Python core devs are volunteers, so it's definitely hard for especially the core devs with families or children. It's really hard to balance the time they spend contributing, and it's for some it's really hard, and I think that's the thing we spend most of our time thinking about how we can make contributing easier and how core developers can really balance their time better. Um, The most interesting part is working on the C Python internals, really coding in C. I said that I worked in C back when I was in high school, and then working on the Peg Parser project, it's all in C. So I've really fallen in love with the C language, and how the Python internals use the C language. And I think it's really really interesting to know what's going on inside Python. And whenever you run like some Python code and in work in your work or whenever, it's really interesting how you think about the things that are going on inside, and that's really interesting. Yeah, and I think the most boring part is reading through all the mailing lists. It's really hard. That may be the hardest thing as well. But yeah, it's really hard and it's really boring to read through all of the threads in the mailing list. Some of them we just skip through and do not even read. But there are some great discussions that are actually not at all boring, but there is some. There are also there is stuff that you just don't have the time to go through, and because Python Dev and Python Ideas are two huge mailing lists with a huge amount of users and posters and threads, so it's just that you don't really have the time to go through all of them. You just need to pick the most important ones and read through those because they're the interesting ones. But yeah, the rest of the stuff is mostly pretty not boring, but it's stuff that's just time consuming and you don't have the time to go through.
Okay, okay. Thanks. Now that answers both questions of this
Mm.
and the previous dev sprint. So
Yeah.
yeah, and like I said, Python is an open source things, right? So how do you connect with the community and what they might be asking for? Maybe the people just want this thing. So how do you connect with the community and what are the channels which you are looking at me? So yeah.
Me personally, I since I haven't been a core developer for such a long time, it's really been like 3 or 4 months. I've never dealt with this problem, but I know that other core developers have been trying really hard to connect with the community and find out what the needs and the yeah, what the needs of the community are and what people want in the next releases of Python. And I think the most basic channels are basically the mailing lists and the Python discourse node. So discuss.python.org is a great place for people to just go in and browse through Python stuff or write about Python or things they want. And then the mailing lists, Python Ideas and Python Dev are basically the two most traffic loaded and important, let's say, channels from the Python core development team to the Python community. There's also things like Twitter or Facebook and Twitter accounts by core devs, or like Guido's or Pablo's, or Gregory's, or Raymond's. I think Python Dev, Python Ideas, and the discourse node are the most important channels.
Yeah, even this video can help. I mean, all
Yeah,
the
of
community.
course.
Yeah,
Hopefully, yeah.
yeah, even that can answer the question regarding the parser thing and all. So actually, to be honest, for the 3.9, the most interesting thing for me was the parser thing. Actually, even I mailed Quadro regarding this. I told him that I actually want to discuss with the new parser thing. I actually went through all your articles. He actually wrote 5 to 6 blogs on the Medium, and I was just going through it. And few of his conference, even I saw that like I saw that Guerrero is actually pretty much excited about the peg parser, so let's hear him from that. But I actually got a reply from him that no, he's actually busy, so you can. So I just found that Q&A session, and I saw that there were many kind of code developers and not many replied. But thanks to you. You were the first person who actually replied to me and coming for
It's
this
okay.
session today. Yeah, and thank you. And
Thank you.
one more thing, like the promotion thing. So you got to promote it to the co-developer thing. So who got like for the voting thing? How does it go? And who can nominate the person to become a co-developer team? Co-developer, I mean.
So yeah, so you gotta be nominated by at least another core developer. So it's not like I can go and say I want to be a core developer. I have to be nominated by another one, and there's a vote for a week, and you gotta get 2/3 of the vote. And then the Python Steering Council has to approve the new entry. So that's pretty much the voting process. It's not that complicated. It's just that we open a thread on the discourse I talked about earlier, on the Python discourse node, and there's a poll there with yes or no. You just click yes or no, and if a person gets 2/3 of the vote, then they're promoted. Yeah, given that the steering council does not deny.
So these votes are done by other Python contributors, or it can be any, or like who are the
No,
voters?
it's only Python core developers. So
Okay,
it's only the Python core development team votes for this, and then the steering council has to approve. Yeah.
right. Okay, so that okay. Now I got it. I was looking like it was no the Python. It can be the Python contributor and so on. So
No,
that
no.
yeah. So that answers my question, and I think so. That's all my questions I have prepared for you. And yeah,
Cool. Okay.
actually, so I wanted to questions which are really specific to you because you are totally into the parser thing. I just wanted to make sure the session is actually into that so that I can get the most insight from that too. Yeah, and what do you think about the like from 10 years from now? What do you think about Python? Like how what is can be the future of the Python and how be visualizing it?
Oh, there's just a bunch of things that might become of Python. So I can see in 10 years, I can see Python being on mobile or on the web. So there are some projects that look into that and how we can port Python to mobile or the web. And it's really a discussion we must have at some point to sit down and say where do we see Python in 10 years and where do we actually want it to be. These are all questions that we need to answer, but are very difficult to get answered. But I think, yeah, we'll see. It's a very difficult question. But yeah, if I had to guess, I'd say that Python should have some place on the web and some place on the mobile.
Okay. So just one last question. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
just a guy who knows the basic of Python. Okay, so
Yeah.
I did some of my projects in Python and maybe deployed some bot things, right? So what advice would you give me to actually start contributing to the Python team? Like what?
So yeah, the advice, just find an area that you're interested in, and find some code you're interested in, and that makes you excited, and just go into that, look into that, find out stuff about it, and then just commit a patch. It's not that hard, and we really do our best to guide you through the whole process, from the point you commit your first patch until getting it merged. There's a process, but there are people that really do their best in guiding you through that process. And I think the most difficult part and the most challenging part is finding an area that really interests you, and you have to commit yourself into learning more about that. And I think that's the most challenging part. If you got that, then it's from there it gets easier, because there's always going to be some bug on that area, something you can fix or something you can improve, and then you're gonna find something eventually, and commit a patch, and then it's really easy to stay in Python, in the Python community, or in the Python contributor community, once you get there.
Yes, that's actually all of my questions. So I'll yeah, I'll be stopping the stream.
Okay.
So thank you for coming for this session. It was actually great to have you and discuss everything about the Python. It started from the Python 3.9, then it improved from the parser thing, and then LL1 and the code development thing, the Grado. It's actually pretty much great, and even I'm looking forward to become a code developer, and guided by the Grado, and maybe you and guided by you. So actually, I I do look. This is now in my list to do in my life. Yeah. So thank you for
Yeah,
joining for the session today.
it was my pleasure.